the final part of our discussion when it comes to Asian Americans and the world of work are small business owners. And we kind of touched upon this earlier with our discussion of Koreans as middleman minorities earlier in the semester. We talked also about South Asian entrepreneurs within ethnic enclaves. This touches upon that some immigrants arrive to the United States and they become entrepreneurial rather than, seeking a job as a laborer in the secondary market system. In fact, nearly 2 million small businesses are owned by Asians today within our formal economy. And by the way, not all of them are catering to co-ethnics. That is to say, again, people from the same ethnic or, racial group or ethnic group. For example, many Indians today from India, they found an economic niche in the motel business. So today, if you go to a motel, you'll see it oftentimes run and even owned by Indians. Same is true with gas stations. Okay, so they're catering to the public at large. That's also true with Koreans. They tend to not solely cater to co-ethnics. They open their business to the wider public. And again, that was the model minority situation that we just discussed. Okay, so what are the motivating factors behind small business? Why decide to do that, to take a risk? Because it is truly a risk here to arrive to this country and decide to launch an enterprise, to be entrepreneurial, especially when oftentimes you don't know the language, you're unfamiliar with, let's say, consumer practices in the United States, consumer relations. So it is a big risk. Well, for many, it was something we discussed earlier regarding human capital. Let's remember that human capital also refers to language ability, not just education, not just experience, but language ability. So many decide to open a small business precisely because of their lack of fluency in English. Now, another reason is also that their degree that they attained in their home country is undervalued, if not invalid, when they come to the United States. Okay. Some refer to the fact that they initially entered a job, even as professionals, and they realized there was a glass ceiling. So they decided, it's probably better and more comfortable for me to open my own business. And they feel more comfortable with that rather than being caught up in the situation I just described. Okay, so you see that happening. And in fact, since the 1965 Immigration Act, with some ethnic groups, the professionals and the educated tended to enter small businesses and ethnic economies due to the reasons above, because they felt more comfortable in an environment like, let's say, a restaurant, rather than, the world of work in a professional sense. Okay, so I want to mention, however, that some groups, some Asian Americans, some ethnicities tend not to pursue are less inclined to pursue small businesses who are highly educated. That's particularly true with Chinese and Filipinos. They tend not to enter small businesses, and that's in contrast to Koreans who tend to do so, or South Asians, especially Indians, as I mentioned earlier. They tend to be more entrepreneurial than the Chinese Americans and Filipino Americans. Now, one important thing is the reliance upon ethnic capital, as noted on the slide there. Now, this is in contrast to assimilation theory, or sometimes called assimilationist theory, which, again, just to remind you, argues that, assimilation is a process whereby immigrants gradually abandon their, traditional outlooks and their viewpoints, and become more similar to American culture to the point where race and ethnicity no longer matters. They even, let's say, second or third generation down the way, they become virtually indistinguishable, right, from other Americans. So, in other words, you abandon those ethnic ties that you had when you first arrived, straight from your home country as an immigrant. But in contrast to that, the assimilation theory, researchers have found that Asian American immigrants who ventured into small business, in other words, they launched their own businesses, they became owners of it, they relied heavily, upon ethnic capital. Now, what is ethnic capital? It's very close to social capital, but I think it's more broad. You could say it's the ethnic environments and ethnic networks found within their communities, the ethnic community, whereby you see, trust and certain advantages that stem from their environment. Okay, so certainly you could, make use of social capital within it, but also, it's a network again, the environment, the ethnic networks that are there to help you. Okay, so it's more broad, in other words, than simply social capital. Now, Asian American immigrants rely heavily upon ethnic capital when they venture into small businesses. Okay, sometimes they arrive here with some financial capital, right? Like literally money to launch a business, right? Or they might pool their money together with other co-ethnics. Let's say to open a restaurant, they decide to invest all together, like, or Koreans deciding to open a grocery store. They get other Koreans that they know in their ethnic networks, like maybe, they attend the same church and they do this. I'm saying this because I know someone who did this, opened their business by seeking fellow church members. So they rely on kin, they rely on friends to jumpstart their business. They even hire co-ethnics, right? That's not always the case. Like Indian motel owners sometimes they'll hire immigrants from or Latinx workers, right? Immigrants from South America or Central America. But usually they use this networking, and again, this is the use of ethnic capital in the attempt to launch their business. Okay. Now, or let's just say this, there are options for these immigrants. Opening businesses where they're catering to other co-ethnics within the ethnic enclave, or they could open a business serving populations that are ignored by large corporations. And again, that should sound familiar to you. That is the middleman minority. Okay, so these are the two spaces that usually find many, especially newly arrived Asian immigrants. They either cater to co-ethnics or they cater to other populations ignored by large corporations. And again, that's the middleman minority. Now, let me just discuss that in case you have to jog your memory about that. We were talking about Koreans, how they take a big risk in, investing and opening these stores or grocery stores or liquor stores in economically depressed neighborhoods of cities, usually comprised, almost always comprised, of other racial minorities, let's say Latinx or African Americans. We're talking about the poorer populations. And in those neighborhoods, you see lack of investment from large corporations, like a large, let's say, Ralph's chain, that is, the grocery store, or Walmart, not being found in these poor neighborhoods, because the corporation decided it is a risk to do so. They know ahead of time that the potential customers, consumers are of low income. They won't spend a lot in the stores. In fact, they might be susceptible to vandalism and crime because they know about that area tends to have heavily or more heavy concentration of that. So they don't open stores in these neighborhoods. So what fills in the gap there? Well, the middleman minority. You're still a minority, but you're opening these much smaller stores like a Korean liquor store, a Korean grocery store in, let's say, South Los Angeles. And oftentimes it leads to ethnic friction. The residents of the neighborhoods often claim, lack of respect from the owners, the Asian owners. Sometimes they're resentful of the immigrant-owned business over it being black-owned, right? And, they claim that they overcharge the residents and so forth. At the same time, the owners of the business claim that the consumers tend to steal because they're poor, and they are disrespectful towards the owners, right? So it's almost like this exchange of disrespect between owner and consumer there. Okay, so it's a big risk here to cater to U.S. born, despite the different culture, different language, different interests. And that's opposed to the ethnic enclave owner, where the advantages are pretty clear, right? You have the advantages of familiarity with the goods itself that you're selling, familiarity with the clients because they're co-ethnics. But at the same time, you also see that business limited in its scope of potential customers and clients, right? If you open a restaurant that is only going to be that's only going to be catering towards co-ethnics, and the consumers tend to be much less, right, than if you open to the wider public. And moreover, they become dependent on these co-ethnic business supports, okay? And oftentimes there's fierce competition, for example, for restaurants. Let's imagine different Chinese restaurants on the same block of an ethnic neighborhood, right? It becomes fierce competition when you depend on this co-ethnic business support as your customers. Moreover, you see some family and generational issues within the ethnic enclave business. For example, it's oftentimes that you have a Korean family, just to give an example, owning these grocery stores or liquor stores, and the wives often complain that they lack respect when it comes to their relationship with their husband, despite the long hours and the long pay that they endure, the low pay that they endure. And this is a form of patriarchy, you could say, that's transferring over from the home country to the business in America, right? They're not seen as equal partners. In fact, one wonders whether they're being influenced by American culture in that respect, right? More equality between genders and sexes. Also, with second-generation children, they tend not to pursue the small business once they get of age. They prefer to receive educational or some kind of vocational training. If they do actually pursue the small business and take over from their parents, they are able to benefit from their parents' financial and social capital that's already established there. So, in a way that's good. But oftentimes children tend to resent the fact that when they're working as younger teens and even younger adults, that they have no leisure time. They're forced to work there at the restaurant for long hours, low pay again. And they're often caught between cultures here, right? Especially when they come here as very young children. That's called 1.5 generation. When you come here as a very young child, let's